Sarah Mitchell paid only $12,000 for a crumbling ranch in Monument Valley that everyone called worthless. Her brother laughed in her face. Her ex-husband said she was throwing away their daughter's future. Her own mother told her she was being a fool. But when she discovered the sealed chamber beneath the stable floor, she realized she'd inherited $265 million in lost Hollywood history and a secret that powerful families had been hiding for 50 years. What she found in that chamber would destroy careers, rewrite history, and put her 8-year-old daughter's life in immediate danger. The eviction notice was taped to her apartment door when Mia came home from school on a Tuesday afternoon in March. Sarah's hands shook as she peeled it off before her daughter could see the bold red letters screaming, "Final notice." 30 days. That's all they had left. Her bank account showed exactly $847.23. She knew the precise amount because she checked it obsessively, watching it drain like her life was bleeding out in real time. The gas bill was 2 months overdue. The electricity company had called 3 times that week, their tone shifting from polite reminder to barely concealed threat. She'd been stretching a single box of store-brand mac and cheese into 2 dinners, sometimes 3, adding extra water to make it look like more. And Mia had stopped asking why they never had strawberry shampoo anymore, the kind that smelled like artificial fruit and better times, the kind from before the divorce, before Derek left, before everything fell apart like a house built on sand. Sarah worked double shifts at the Route 66 diner, her feet aching in shoes with cardboard covering the holes in the soles. She'd tried to glue them twice, but the Arizona heat melted the adhesive within hours, leaving sticky residue that collected dirt. The tips were getting worse every month. Tourists didn't stop like they used to. Gas prices were too high, the economy was tight, and people drove straight through to Vegas or the Grand Canyon, barely glancing at the faded diners and desperate tourist traps along the old highway. Last Tuesday, she'd worked an 8-hour shift and made $34 in tips. $34 for 8 hours of smiling until her face hurt, refilling coffee cups, pretending she wasn't dying inside. Her ex-husband, Derek, 3 months without child support. Again. His lawyer. Somehow Derek could afford a lawyer while claiming he was too broke to help his own daughter. Kept filing continuances, postponements, delays. The court system moved like molasses in winter. Meanwhile, Derek posted photos from Cabo on Instagram with his new girlfriend, a 24-year-old dental hygienist named Brittany, who wore bikinis that cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. The photos showed them on a yacht. A yacht. While Sarah was deciding whether to pay the electric bill or buy Mia new shoes because her toes were cramped in the old ones. Her brother Marcus called twice. A week to remind her what a failure she was. Her mother had stopped calling altogether after Sarah asked to borrow money for the 3rd time. Her few remaining friends had drifted away, tired of the constant crisis, tired of her inability to get her life together. At 34 years old, Sarah Mitchell felt like she'd already lived an entire lifetime of disappointment. Her phone buzzed during the lunch rush on Thursday. Unknown number with a 435 area code. Utah. She almost didn't answer, expecting another debt collector with their scripted sympathy and veiled threats. But something, instinct, desperation, the faint hope that maybe someone was calling with good news for once, made her step into the back alley, wiping grease from her hands onto her apron. "Miss Mitchell, this is Howard Chen from Desert Valley Estate Services. I'm calling about your great-uncle Robert Mitchell's will." Sarah's heart sank like a stone dropped in deep water. Uncle Robert. She'd met him exactly twice in her entire life. Once at her grandmother's funeral when she was 12, where he'd stood in the back corner looking profoundly uncomfortable in an ill-fitting suit that seemed borrowed, and once at a random family reunion when she was 17, where he'd barely said 3 words before leaving early, claiming he had to get back home, though nobody knew where home was. He'd been estranged from the family for decades, living alone somewhere in Utah or Arizona, the details always vague. Nobody talked about him much except in whispers and knowing glances. Her mother called him the weird one and changed the subject. Marcus said he was crazy, collecting junk in the desert, talking to himself. She didn't even know he'd died. "I'm very sorry for your loss," Mr. Chen continued in a tone that suggested he said this 100 times a week. a professional mourner delivering rehearsed condolences. Your great-uncle passed away 6 weeks ago. Lung cancer. He left you his property in his will. A ranch in Monument Valley, Utah side, near the Arizona border. Approximately 340 acres with structures. For one absurd, intoxicating second, Sarah felt a genuine flicker of hope that made her lightheaded. A ranch. Property. 340 acres. Maybe she could sell it, pay off her debts, buy herself some breathing room, give Mia a Christmas with actual presents instead of dollar store toys. Then reality crashed back like cold water, drowning that brief moment of fantasy. Valley. That meant middle of nowhere. Desert wasteland. No water rights probably, or if there were water rights, they'd be tied up in Native American land disputes and legal complications. Likely falling apart if Uncle Robert had been living there alone for decades. Worthless land that she'd probably owe tens of thousands in back taxes on. Another burden to crush her further into the ground. I appreciate that, Mr. Chen, but I'm not really in a position to deal with property right now. I'm about to be evicted from my apartment. I don't have money for gas to drive out there. Can I just sign it over to someone? Disclaim it? Is there a process for... There is one unusual condition, Mr. Chen interrupted, and something in his voice, a slight change in pitch, a note of warning or significance, made Sarah pause with her free hand pressed against the grimy brick wall. The will is very specific on this point, Ms. Mitchell. Very specific. You cannot sell, transfer, or dispose of the property or any of its contents for 6 months from the date of inheritance. You must take physical possession of the property, and well, the wording is quite strange. You must honor what was protected and decide what truth deserves light. Sarah closed her eyes and leaned against the dumpster in the alley, smelling rotten food and defeat. Perfect. Just perfect. A crazy uncle with a crazy will and a property she couldn't even sell to save herself from homelessness. A property that would probably cost her. Money she didn't have. Another disaster to add to the endless pile. What happens if I refuse the inheritance? Then the property reverts to the state of Utah, which will auction it for back taxes and administrative costs. You'll receive nothing. But Ms. Mitchell, I should mention, your uncle paid all property taxes through the end of this year, and he left a small maintenance fund, $12,000. That money is available to you immediately upon acceptance of the inheritance, regardless of the 6-month restriction on the property itself. $12,000. Sarah's mind went blank for a second, then began racing. That would cover her rent for 4 months, maybe 5 if she was extremely careful and ate nothing but rice and beans. It would pay the electric bill, the gas bill, all the screaming red envelopes piling up on her counter. It would buy Mia new shoes, the ones with the lights that she'd been wanting for her birthday. It would buy time, precious, desperate time to find a second job to get Derek's child support sorted out, to figure out some way to stop drowning. I'll accept, she said, the words coming out hoarse. Send me whatever I need to sign. I'll email the documents today. Ms. Mitchell, one more thing. Your uncle left a personal note. He asked me to read it to you verbatim. Are you ready? Sarah nodded, then realized he couldn't see her. Yes. Mr. Chen cleared his throat. He wrote, Sarah, you don't know me, but I've been watching you. Not in a creepy way, through your mother's Facebook, which she doesn't know I can see. You got dealt a bad hand. You didn't deserve Derek or Marcus or any of it, but you kept fighting for Mia. That's what matters. What I'm leaving you will change your life if you're smart and brave. Don't let them scare you. 6 months. That's all you need. Uncle Robert. Sarah stood in that alley for 5 full minutes after the call ended, staring at nothing, tears running down her face for reasons she couldn't entirely name. That weekend her brother Marcus called. He'd heard about the inheritance. Family gossip traveled at the speed of light when it involved money or scandal, especially when it involved the weird uncle nobody talked about. You actually thinking about driving out to see that dump? Sarah, Uncle Robert was certifiable. Everyone knows it. He lived like a hermit in some shack in the desert, talking to himself, collecting junk and old movies. Whatever he left you, it's probably condemned. Probably full of black mold and asbestos and God knows what else. You'll spend more money making it sellable than it's worth. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Marcus. Sarah kept her voice flat, emotionless, refusing to give him the satisfaction of hurting her. I'm being realistic here, trying to help you for once. You're broke, you're about to be evicted, and you're thinking about wasting gas money on a fantasy. Look, I know a guy who deals in salvage rights and desert properties. Sell me. Whatever's there for $5,000 right now, sight unseen. At least you'll have something certain. Cash in hand. Better than nothing. $5,000. It would buy her 2 months of stability, maybe 3 if she ate nothing but ramen and walked to work instead of taking the bus. But something in Marcus's voice, that familiar condescension that had been there her entire life, the same tone he'd used when he told her marrying Derek was a mistake, when he told her she was stupid for not finishing college, when he told her that real estate was the only path to wealth while he flipped houses and she served coffee to truckers, made her jaw tighten. Marcus had made a fortune during the housing boom, riding the wave of easy credit and desperate buyers. He drove a Tesla and lived in Scottsdale with his perfect wife Jennifer and his perfect kids in their perfect house with a pool and a 3-car garage. He posted photos of family vacations to Hawaii and Colorado ski trips. He'd never once offered to help when she was sleeping in her car after Derek left, when she was literally homeless with a 4-year-old daughter. Never once sent money for Mia's school supplies or birthday presents. Never once acknowledged that maybe, just maybe, he could spare something from his abundance. But now he wanted to buy Uncle Robert's property for a fraction of what it might be worth, swooping in like a vulture. "I'll think about it," Sarah said, and hung up before he could push harder, before he could deploy more of his practiced arguments and patronizing advice. She borrowed her coworker Rita's truck, a beat-up Chevy that burned oil and had a cracked windshield held together with duct tape, and drove out on Sunday morning. Mia sat in the passenger seat, clutching her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Hoppy, which was missing an ear and had been sewn up so many times it was more thread than fabric, a patchwork survivor just like them. "Where are we going, Mama?" Mia's voice was small, tentative, the emotive voice of a child who'd learned not to get her hopes up. "To see a ranch that belonged to my uncle. Your great-great-uncle, technically. He left it to us. Did you love him?" Sarah thought about that, choosing her words carefully. "I didn't know him, baby, but maybe that's why he left it to me. Sometimes people surprise you. Sometimes the people you barely know understand you better than the people who see you every day." The drive took 4 hours through increasingly desolate landscape. Past Flagstaff with its pine trees and college students, past Tuba City with its trading posts and roadside stands selling Navajo jewelry, into the vast red emptiness of the Navajo Nation, and up toward Utah. The land here was ancient and unforgiving, towering buttes and mesas that looked like cathedrals built by giants, endless skies so blue it hurt to look at, and a silence so profound it felt like the earth itself was holding its breath, waiting for something momentous to happen. The ranch appeared. Suddenly, after a turn off Highway 163, marked by a weathered wooden arch that Sarah almost missed. Faded letters carved into old timber read, "Rancho Cielo, the Sky Ranch." A long dirt road, rutted and rough, led to a cluster of buildings about a 1/4 mile from the highway. As they got closer, Sarah's breath caught. It looked like it had been magnificent once, maybe 30 or 40 years ago. The main house was substantial. Thick adobe walls painted a faded cream color that was peeling in long strips. A covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides, a red tile roof that was mostly intact, though several tiles were missing, leaving gaps like missing teeth. The stable was massive, easily large enough for 30 or 40 horses, a cathedral of timber and adobe. There were several outbuildings, a bunkhouse with a sagging roof, a storage shed with doors hanging crooked, what looked like an old workshop with broken windows, all of it slowly surrendering to the desert, paint peeling like sunburned skin, tumbleweeds piled high against every wall like the desert was trying to reclaim what had been taken from it, windows cracked or missing entirely. But the bones were good. Sarah could see that even from a distance, even through the decay. This place had been built to last by someone with money and vision and dreams. The walls were thick. The foundations looked solid. This wasn't some thrown-together shack. This was real construction, real investment. "Mama, it's spooky," Mia whispered, gripping Mr. Hoppy tighter, pressing closer to Sarah's side. "It's just old, baby, just old and lonely. Come on, Let's explore. Let's see what Uncle Robert wanted us to find. The front door wasn't locked. The key Mr. Chen had sent turned easily in a lock that had been recently oiled, which was strange for an abandoned property. That was the first odd thing. Inside, furniture sat under dusty white sheets like ghosts frozen mid-party, waiting for guests who would never arrive. But it was clean. Not pristine, but clean. No animal droppings from rats or raccoons or coyotes. No evidence of squatters or vandals or teenagers looking for a place to party. No graffiti or broken bottles or drug paraphernalia. Just stillness and dust and the smell of abandonment. But organized abandonment. Intentional abandonment, like someone had carefully closed this place up and walked away. Sarah walked through rooms that felt frozen in time, like a museum or a memory. A kitchen with turquoise, tile counters and a massive 1960s refrigerator, avocado green, the color of vintage appliances that hummed to life when she plugged it in. Still working after all these years somehow. A living room with a stone fireplace large enough to stand inside, leather sofas under sheets and built-in bookshelves filled with hardcover books, thousands of them, organized by author, carefully preserved. A dining room with a table that could seat 12, chairs neatly pushed in, bedrooms with iron bed frames, and thick wooden dressers, each one pristinely made up under dust covers. And everywhere, photographs in frames on walls and shelves and tables. Not of Uncle Robert, of John Wayne. Sarah stopped in front of a wall in the living room that was covered entirely in framed pictures, dozens of them arranged in a careful grid. John Wayne on horseback, his iconic squint and commanding presence unmistakable even in faded color photos. John Wayne shaking hands with Uncle Robert, a much younger Uncle Robert, maybe 30 years old, smiling broadly like he'd won the lottery or met God. John Wayne filming in Monument Valley. The distinctive buttes and spires rising in the background like monuments to an ancient world. The same landscape visible through the window right now. Several photos showed the two men together in casual settings. John Wayne with his arm around Uncle Robert's shoulders, both laughing at something off camera, drinks in hand. Uncle Robert holding a clapperboard on, sahifohim, what looked like a movie set, wearing a headset and looking official. The two of them sitting on a porch. This very porch, Sarah realized, sharing drinks as the sun set behind them, silhouetted against impossible orange and purple skies. In every picture, they looked like genuine friends. Not employer and employee, not star and fan, not celebrity and hanger-on. Friends. Real friends. The kind who knew each other's secrets. "Mama, who's that man?" Mia asked, pointing at a close-up portrait of John. Wayne in his prime, all masculine confidence and Western charisma. "That's John Wayne, honey. He was a very famous actor a long time ago. He made cowboy movies. He was like a superhero, but with horses and guns instead of capes." "Is he still alive?" "No, baby. He died a long time ago, before Mama was even born, before Grandma was even young. But that didn't make sense. None of it made sense. Uncle Robert had been nobody. A hermit, Marcus said. A weirdo who lived alone in the desert talking to himself, collecting junk. How did a hermit know John Wayne? How did a nobody become friends with one of the biggest movie stars in history, someone whose face was known around the entire world? How did you go from being best friends with Hollywood royalty to being the family embarrassment that nobody talked about? Sarah's phone rang, making her jump. Marcus again. "Listen, Sarah, I talked to some people in the real estate business. Did some research. That property? I was being generous offering. You $5,000? It's worth nothing. Maybe the land is worth 8 or 10,000 if you find exactly the right buyer, some developer looking for remote desert acreage. The buildings are probably liabilities. You'd have to pay to demolish them safely, deal with environmental cleanup, asbestos abatement. I'm willing to go up to 8,000 cash right now. Today. Wire transfer. You can't afford to wait 6 months. You'll be on the street before then. I just got here, Marcus. I haven't even looked around yet. I've been here for 20 minutes. Can you give me? A property lawyer I know says you're looking at 20, maybe 30,000 in back taxes and environmental liens. Sarah, you're going to end up owing money on this thing. You'll be worse off than when you started. Take my offer. 8,000 cash. I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to protect you from yourself." She hung up on him and turned off her phone. The stable drew her attention like a magnet, pulling her across. The yard. It was larger than the house. A massive timber and adobe structure with a gambrel roof and enormous sliding doors that looked like they belonged in a cathedral. Heavy wood reinforced with iron straps. Most of the wood showed signs of age, weathering, sun damage. But the structure was sound. The roof didn't sag. The walls stood straight. Sarah walked the length of it, her footsteps echoing in the empty space, dust motes dancing in shafts of sunlight that came through gaps in the walls. Stalls lined both sides, each one hand-built with solid lumber and iron hardware that had been forged, not mass-produced. She counted 26 stalls. Empty now. Silent. But she could almost hear phantom horses, feel the presence of life that had once filled this space. At the far end, she noticed something odd. The building's external dimensions didn't match the internal layout. Based on where she'd walked outside, measuring the building's footprint, there should have been at least 3 more. Stalls here, maybe 4. But there was only empty floor space and a wall that looked newer than the rest. The wood less weathered, the nails shinier, the construction style slightly different. Sarah pressed her hand against the wooden planks. One of them shifted under pressure, moving slightly inward. Her heart started pounding for reasons she couldn't immediately explain, adrenaline flooding her system like her body knew something her mind hadn't processed yet. She pulled at the loose board. It came away easily, revealing a gap behind it. Not empty space, but a metal surface painted to match the wood grain. Then another board, and another. Within minutes, she'd exposed a hidden door. Rough metal, carefully painted to blend in, almost invisible unless you knew where to look, with a combination lock that looked military grade, modern, completely out of place in a building this old. "Mama?" Mia called from outside, her voice small and frightened. "I'm hungry. Can we eat lunch?" "Coming." "Baby." But Sarah couldn't move. She stared at that door for a long moment, her mind racing through possibilities. Why would Uncle Robert hide a door? What was behind it? Why was the lock so modern when everything else was decades old? And why did looking at it make her heart race and her palms sweat like she was standing at the edge of something dangerous and irreversible? She carefully replaced the boards, covering the door again, and went to make sandwiches for Mia from the cooler they'd brought, peanut butter and jelly on cheap white bread, warm juice boxes, baby carrots. That night, they slept in the main house. Or rather, Mia slept in one of the bedrooms on a bare mattress Sarah found in a closet, still in plastic wrapping, like it had been recently purchased and never used. Sarah lay awake in the next room on a dusty couch, listening to the desert silence. Not actual silence, but a vast emptiness punctuated by strange sounds. Coyotes howling in the distance, wind whistling through cracks, the house settling and creaking, and her own thoughts racing endlessly, thinking about that door, about Marcus's increasingly aggressive offers, about Uncle Robert's strange will. Honor what was protected and decide what truth deserves light. What truth? What was protected? And from whom? She spent the next morning exploring the rest of the property while Mia played in the yard, drawing in the dirt with sticks and talking to Mr. Hoppy. The bunkhouse had 6 narrow rooms, each with a metal cot and a small dresser. Quarters for ranch hands, though there was no evidence anyone had lived there in years. Dust lay thick and undisturbed. The workshop contained old tools hung neatly on pegboards, each one in its designated spot. Hammers, saws, wrenches, all carefully organized. A workbench covered in dust, and a wall calendar from 1979 showing a movie poster for The Shootist, John Wayne's last film. Sarah pulled out her phone and Googled it, burning through her limited data. The Shootist had been released in 1976, 3 years before John Wayne died of stomach cancer in 1979. She scrolled through images. Wayne playing an aging gunfighter dying of cancer, his final role eerily mirroring his real life. Art, imitating life, imitating death. She looked at the calendar again. Why would Uncle Robert have stopped on 1979? Why leave it frozen at that particular year? Had that been the year everything changed? The year something happened that divided his life into before and after? Finally, when Mia was occupied with coloring books on the porch, humming tunelessly to herself in that way children do, Sarah went back to the stable. She pulled away the boards covering the hidden door and stared at the combination lock. 5 digits. 32,000 possible combinations. No way to guess randomly. She tried Uncle Robert's birthday from the documents Mr. Chen had sent. Or 5, 15, 46. Nothing. The lock didn't budge. She tried random combinations based on significant dates she could think of. Nothing. She tried Mia's birthday, her own birthday, her mother's birthday, her grandmother's birthday. Nothing. The lock remained stubbornly closed, mocking her attempts. Then, on impulse, she went back to the house and examined the photographs more carefully, really looking at them instead of just glancing. On the back of one, the picture of John Wayne and Uncle Robert on the porch, both smiling, drinks raised in a toast. She found faded pencil writing in shaky handwriting. 05-26-79. Last good day. Last time Duke smiled. Last time anything made sense. May 26, 1979. 16 days before John Wayne died on June 11th. Sarah went back to the stable, her hands shaking, and entered 05-26-79 into the lock. It clicked open with a sound like a small bell, like a door opening into another world. Sarah's hands were shaking so badly she could barely turn the handle. The metal was cool under her palm, smooth, well-maintained. The door opened with a groan of metal on metal that echoed through the empty stable, revealing steep wooden steps descending into darkness. Cool air wafted up, carrying the scent of leather and old paper and something else. Temperature control, air conditioning. The faint hum of machinery that shouldn't exist in an abandoned ranch. She pulled out her phone flashlight and descended carefully, one step at a time, into the unknown. The chamber was larger than she'd expected, at least 30 feet square, maybe more, with a ceiling high enough to stand comfortably. The air was cool and dry, almost sterile, like a museum or a bank vault. Climate-controlled somehow, though she couldn't see any obvious HVAC equipment. The walls were lined with industrial metal shelving, the kind used in archives and museums, expensive professional equipment. And everywhere were treasures beyond comprehension. Film canisters lined one entire wall, stacked carefully on shelves, each one labeled with white adhesive labels and neat black marker. Handwriting. Sarah moved closer, reading labels with growing disbelief. True Grit. Deleted Scenes 1969. Reels 379. Director's Notes. Too violent for rating. The Shootist. Final Cut. 1976. Complete work print with alternate ending. Stagecoach. Rehearsal footage. 1939. Ford's personal copy. Only print. The Searchers. Alternate ending. 1956. Destroyed per studio order. This copy saved. Sarah counted quickly, her mind reeling. At least 200 canisters. Maybe more. One potentially containing lost footage, deleted scenes, alternate versions of classic films. Each one worth a fortune to collectors, archives, film historians. On a sturdy wooden table in the center of the room sat stacks of leather-bound journals, each one embossed with gold initials, J.W., John Wayne. Sarah opened one at random with trembling hands, and John Wayne's handwriting sprawled across the page in confident blue ink, the writing of someone used to signing autographs and scripts. March 15th, 1967. Robert thinks I'm drinking too much again. He's probably right. He's always right about these things, damn him. But how do you explain to someone that every role takes a piece of you, and eventually you don't remember which piece was real? Today I was Duke Morrison for about 10 minutes before noon, just long enough to remember I used to be a real person. Then I was John Wayne for the cameras and the press and the fans. Then I was Rooster Cogburn for 6 hours of shooting in the heat. Now I'm sitting here at 2 a.m. wondering which one of these men gets to go to sleep, which one dreams, which one wakes up tomorrow. Sarah's hands trembled as she turned pages. Entry after entry of private thoughts, doubts, fears, revelations. The inner life of an icon written in his own hand. Confessions about his marriages, his children, his regrets. Political opinions he could never express publicly. Fears about aging, about relevance, about mortality. The real John Wayne, not the myth. Personal letters filled dozens of archive boxes, organized chronologically. Sarah opened one at random and found correspondence from John Ford, the legendary director, written in 1952. "Duke, you're being an ass about this and you know it. The role isn't beneath you. You're beneath the role right now. Stop playing John Wayne and become the character. Stop being a movie star and be an actor. That's what I hired you for. That's what you're capable of when you stop posing." Another box contained letters from Katharine Hepburn, written in elegant script on personal stationery. Intimate letters discussing their brief affair during filming, her opinions on his politics, her advice on his career. Letters that would rewrite Hollywood history if they ever became public. Howard Hawks, Ward Bond, Henry Fonda, Maureen O'Hara, dozens of Hollywood legends, all writing to John Wayne with unguarded honesty. Studios fighting over contracts. Directors arguing about creative control. Actors confessing their insecurities and addictions. The private business of Hollywood's golden age, preserved in perfect condition. But it was the cabinet against the far wall that made Sarah's knees weak and forced her to sit down on a wooden crate before she fell. Behind glass doors, carefully mounted and displayed with museum-quality care, were costumes. Original costumes from John Wayne's most famous films. The leather eye patch and worn vest from True Grit, the role that finally won him an Oscar after decades of being overlooked. The blue cavalry uniform with yellow piping from She Wore a Yellow Ribbon. The leather coat and iconic hat from The Searchers, with visible sweat stains around the collar and careful repair stitches in the sleeve where he'd torn it during filming. Sarah stood and pressed her face close to the glass. These weren't replicas. They were real. She could see the wear, the aging, the authentic details that no reproduction could match. The actual clothes worn by John Wayne on screen, preserved in a hidden chamber beneath a forgotten stable in Monument Valley. She spent the next 3 hours in a daze, carefully documenting everything with her phone camera, taking hundreds of photos. She photographed every film canister label. She gently opened journals and photographed random pages. She examined the costumes through the glass without touching them, afraid her hands might somehow damage irreplaceable artifacts. She found boxes of original scripts with handwritten notes in the margins, Wayne's thoughts on dialogue, character motivation, blocking, lobby cards from first-run theaters, signed contracts worth thousands each, call sheets from famous productions, production budgets showing the real costs of classic films. The monetary value was staggering, incomprehensible. Sarah knew enough about Hollywood collectibles from watching late-night cable shows to understand that authenticated John Wayne items sold for tens of thousands at auction. Costume from True Grit alone could bring $250,000. Original film footage that had been thought lost, potentially priceless to archives and museums. The journals and letters, beyond valuation. Primary source historical documents that universities and libraries would fight over. This wasn't just memorabilia. This was a museum-quality archive of Hollywood history, hidden away for decades for reasons Sarah couldn't begin to understand. But it was the wall safe she almost missed that changed everything, that transformed this from a valuable discovery into something darker and more dangerous. Hidden behind a framed poster from Stagecoach, the 1939 film that made John Wayne a star, was a small safe built into the wall. Not an old safe. A modern biometric safe with a fingerprint scanner and digital display, completely out of place in this time capsule of Hollywood history, recently installed within the last few years, judging by the clean edges around its installation. Sarah stared at it in confusion, her mind spinning. How was she supposed to open this? Uncle Robert was dead. His fingerprints were gone with him. Was this a test? A final barrier? A way of ensuring only the right person found what was inside? Then she noticed the envelope taped to the wall beside the safe, her name written in shaky handwriting across the front, the letters uncertain like they'd been written by someone whose hands no longer worked properly. Not Sarah Mitchell, just Sarah, intimate, personal, familiar. She opened it with trembling fingers, tearing the envelope in her haste. The letter inside was dated 3 months before Uncle Robert died. Sarah, if you're reading this, you proved everyone wrong. You found what I protected for 50 years. You were curious enough to look beyond the obvious, brave enough to come out here when everyone, Marcus, your mother, probably Derek if he even noticed, Told you it was worthless. Smart enough to find the door and solve the lock. I chose you specifically. Not Marcus with his greed and his contempt for anything that doesn't make money. Not your mother with her fear of everything different. Not any of the others who'd sell this for quick cash and never understand what it means. You. Because sometimes the people who've lost everything are the only ones who understand what's truly valuable. Because you kept fighting for Mia when everything else fell apart. That takes a kind of courage most people never find. The safe will open for you. I programmed it 2 weeks ago when I was still mobile enough to get down here. The VA hospital has excellent biometric technology. I told them it was for medical records. They helped me set this up. Inside is the truth they've been trying to bury since 1979. What you do with it will define who you are. Choose wisely. The easy path is always the wrong one. The safe path is usually the coward's path. But you're not a coward, Sarah. You've proved that every day of your life. Duke trusted me to keep his secrets. Now I'm trusting you to reveal them. He made me promise to wait until his kids were old enough to handle it. They're in their 60s now. They've lived their lives. Time for the truth. 6 months isn't legal harassment. It's a gift. 6 months is enough time to understand what you have, research what it means, and decide who you want to be. Less time, and you'll panic and sell to the first person who offers. More time, and they'll find leverage against you. And they will try, Sarah. They'll threaten you. They'll tempt you. They'll try everything. Be smart. Be brave. Be the person I know you can be. Uncle Robert P.S. I never liked your mother much. She married for money and was disappointed. But you're special. You just don't know it yet. Sarah pressed her thumb against the fingerprint scanner, expecting nothing, expecting an error message or rejection. The safe opened with a soft electronic beep that sounded impossibly loud in the silent chamber. Inside was a single leather folder, the kind lawyers use for important documents, the kind used for wills and trusts and things that matter. Sarah opened it with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, her breath coming fast and shallow. The first document was a death certificate for John Wayne, dated June